actually allowed Saul to live when he had the chance to take his life. Remember, David and his men were in the cave when Saul comes in to go to the bathroom, and David is thinking about killing him to begin with, and his men are egging him on. Kill him, the Lord has delivered him to your hands. And he cuts off the corner of Saul's robe, and then his conscience starts bothering him. He says, I'm not going to kill the Lord's anointed. And so he tells his men, hey, we're not doing it. We're not killing him. We're not going to take his life right now. And so after Saul leaves the cave, he goes on down the road a little bit, and that is when David says, hey, Saul, I don't know who in the world is feeding you this false information that I'm trying to do you harm. I have proof right in my hand that I'm not trying to do you any harm. If I had wanted to kill you, I could have killed you. As a matter of fact, a man should be judged not by what other people are saying about him, but a man should be judged by what he does. And what I've done today clearly illustrates to you that I'm not trying to do you any harm. If I wanted to do you harm, I could have. At that particular moment, we have Saul recognizing, at least at some level, not fully, I'm sure, that David was more righteous than he was. And that's what he says. David, my son, you are more righteous than I am. And Saul makes this very important statement here that's valuable for us to understanding this whole story. Jonathan has just met with David. Remember after David saved Keilah, and then he found out Saul was going to come, and the people of Keilah were going to deliver him into Saul's hands? Jonathan comes and strengthens David. And Jonathan said to David, I know you're going to be king one day, David. My father knows that. But this is the first time that Saul actually recognizes that verbally after David spares his life the first time. He says, David, I know one day you are going to be king. And he doesn't like it. I can just sort of, I know it's true. But he implores David, begs David, please, when you are king, don't kill all my family. Don't wipe my name off the face of this earth. And so David makes a covenant. He's already made one with Jonathan not to kill Jonathan's offspring. Now he makes it with Saul that when I am king, I will not destroy your family from the face of the entire earth. And so in between that story and the next major story that we're going to talk about today, there's one verse, chapter 25, and verse 1 starts out by telling us that Samuel died. Now, this is a pretty significant thing, and it's only one verse is given to us about this. But in order to know how significant this is, we have to realize how important Samuel was. Samuel is this bridge from the time of the judges to the time of the kings. He was a good judge. He was an honest man. As a matter of fact, he's already gone before the people and said, look, if I've stolen anything from anybody, if I've taken advantage of anybody, let me know and I'll make it right. And the people said, no, you're top notch. I mean, you've been a great man. Your kids aren't that great, but you've been a great man, and we don't have anything bad to say about you whatsoever. And this man who has helped them, somebody talked about the stone of Ebenezer, I think it was Aaron. He's the one that set that up when they routed the Philistines. This is the stone of help that God has given you. Just a key figure in this time period. Every Israelite would have mourned. And it would have been some serious mourning. This was an icon. This was God's prophet. This was the one that went between them and God, and now he is dead. And you can also imagine with the chaos that is the nation right now, with Saul already, the Spirit of the Lord leaving him already, and with the evil spirit coming upon him, he was acting erratic. David is fleeing in the wilderness. Now the one guy that sort of has given them some kind of stability over these years is dead. There had to be some, what's going to happen next? And could you imagine how you would feel if the guy for the last several years who's held everything together, now he is dead and you have no idea what is going to happen next? So there was a lot of mourning. We're not told at this particular time how much, if David was there or not there in the mourning process. It does say that David left after that, so there could be some indication that David was there. But David was still running from Saul to some degree, even though they had that moment of, I'm not going to kill you, don't kill my family. There's still some animosity. David's pretty smart. One of the things we find out about David and what that contrasts him with Saul, David's instincts were pretty good because they were trained by God. Saul's instincts were pretty bad. I mean, it seems like you look at Saul. Have you ever known somebody who's like, you couldn't make worse decisions. I mean, you could be set out to make the worst decisions ever. I mean, that could be your goal, and you couldn't do any better than you're doing. And that's sort of how Saul is, but David is the opposite of that. David is someone who has good instincts. So however that turned out, we're not really sure. And remember, another very important part of all of this is Samuel almost wasn't. The only reason Samuel was born was because his mom prayed for him. Remember, she couldn't have any children, and so she said that prayer. And Eli saw her say that prayer. She looked so distraught, he thought she was drunk. So, I mean, this is one verse, but it's so monumental. And I think when God is telling us these stories, he wants us to feel the emotional stress and burden that the children of Israel would have felt at that particular moment, knowing that Samuel was dead, Saul was going crazy, and David is on the run. This is a chaotic time. So that was sort of the transition verse into the next major story, and that is a story where David and his men are needing some food. Think about this for a second. David is going to find food other places, other times, and we're not going to like the way he does it. It's just not going to set well with us, the way David feeds his men. But think about this. If you are in charge of 400 men, actually 600 men at this time, right? And later on we find out they have families. One thing you have to know, what do 600 men want to do? They want to eat. What do the kids of 600 men want to do? They want to eat. Dad, I'm hungry. Mom, I'm hungry. There's no food around here. It's all, it's terrible. And so feel that emotional stress that the people would have been going through, knowing that, it's not like they have a factory that are making things and are selling things. It just doesn't work that way. And so David is now, the whole pressure of feeding these guys is falling on David. Some of you who have businesses, you understand that, you recognize that. I mean, could you imagine, even your business might be smaller compared to this. You might have 5 guys or 10 guys or maybe 15 guys that you're responsible for, and you're responsible for their families to make sure that you're getting enough work so they have enough money to eat. Maybe if you're not owning a company, but you're running a company, you got to run that in a way that the people can continue to eat. And David was responsible for that. And we looked at the hierarchy of needs. At the very bottom of the hierarchy of needs is safety and security and food. And we noted that if you don't have food, you're willing to do just about anything. Because you have to have that security and that basic need of life met. And so David is looking out at his options. And he thinks of a really good option in his mind. No one's going to get hurt. I'm not going to steal anything. I'm just going to send 10 of my guys down to a guy named Nabal. And I'm going to ask Nabal very kindly, very politely, if he would mind sharing some of his provisions with me and my men. Now, the Bible introduces these 2 characters, Nabal and Abigail. And again, be impressed with how great of a storyteller God is here, because he introduces them very briefly. But he gives you us enough information to really be able to paint a pretty good picture of these 2, and maybe even the relationship that they had or did not have. He describes Nabal as wealthy. That's important because he's going to be asking him for stuff. And so he's wealthy. And the things that he asked him, how it describes him, he has 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Now, I'm not a rancher and I don't have a bunch of stuff like that, but I would assume that's a lot. The Bible describes him as very wealthy. And so, those sheep are having lambs, and it just keeps going on and on and on and on. And later on, we're going to see that he has a party, and it describes this feast that he has as fit for a king. So the guy is not lacking any kind of provisions. He has a lot of money. But it also describes him in a way that it's important for the context. He was basically harsh. You ever known a harsh guy? Where you don't even want to talk to him. I mean, you really will do anything within your power to avoid even having any interaction with this person because, as we'll see, he just is impossible to deal with. This is the kind of person that you would email instead of call. You would never want to go in this person's office. You would try to email, maybe text, but I mean, you want to avoid this guy like the plague. And he's foolish. Now, the second character that's introduced is his wife. And what the Bible and this great storytelling that God does for us describes her pretty plainly and simply. It says she was beautiful. Now you might think, why is that in the story? Well, we're going to see why that's in the story a little bit later, but she's beautiful. That's an important description on this particular occasion. You know, other people in the Bible are described as beautiful. We looked at the story of Esther. We're going to look a little bit at her again this morning, but she's described as being very beautiful. Sarah was described as being very beautiful, but here Abigail is very beautiful. And she's wise. She's intelligent. So you have a beautiful, intelligent woman married to a rich, harsh fool. And that's the basis of this relationship, and that's who David is going to be dealing with. So David sends these 10 guys down there, and he gives them the greeting that they are supposed to say, and it is a good greeting. So let's go ahead and read that, because I really like this. We'll read it directly from the text. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 25 and verse 14. It says, "When David heard in the desert that Nabal was shearing his sheep, he sent 10 servants, saying to them, 'Go up to Carmel to see Nabal and give him greetings in my name.'" Now, the sermon this morning is going to be in the name of. What does it mean when you do something in the name of someone else? So this is a bonus for those of you who are in this class. I'm not mentioning it in the sermon, but you'll just come back to this when I'm talking about this. He is sending these 10 men with authority and with his name. So there should be some things, some goodwill, some power, some attached to David's name, as he says, mention my name, because that should help you because of who I am and what I've been able to do. And notice the greeting in verse 6. "Then you shall say to my brother, peace to you and your house, peace to all that is yours. Now I hear that you are shearing sheep, that they are shearing sheep for you. When your shepherds were with us, we neither insulted them nor harmed them the whole time they were in Carmel. Ask your own servants, they can tell you. May my servants find favor in your sight." This is them speaking on behalf of David. "For we have come at the time of a holiday. Please provide us, your servants, and your son David with whatever you can spare." Now, that's pretty good. I mean, how are you going to word that any better? Peace, peace, peace. You know, good things to you. You know, we know that you're blessed. Would you please give us something? He doesn't demand anything. He doesn't give a big list of things that he needs. Just give us what you can spare. Give us what you can give us, and we'll be happy with that. Well, as we know how the story goes, Nabal is not having any of that. He goes, "Who in the world is David? I don't know David. I mean, he's just one of these rogue guys that have broken away from the king. I'm not going to help." So these 10 guys, and they go back to David. And they tell David this. We know enough about David. David doesn't want to kill and hurt people that are God's people. But Nabal's not acting like one of God's people right here. And so David, maybe out of character, we'll talk about that in discussion. David tells his 400 men, "Get your swords." These 400 men, just imagine this scene. All these guys are putting their swords on. All these guys are getting ready for battle. 200 guys are going to stay with the supplies. David got his sword on, and just imagine his face. Just what is his face saying? "Oh, I am going to kill that man. And not only am I going to kill that man, we're going to kill everybody, all the males in his household. Nothing's going to be left of Nabal and his family. I am eradicating him from the face of the entire earth." Well, one of the servants of Nabal overheard all of this stuff. And so he knows he's in trouble. He knows they're all in trouble, and so he does the only thing he knows to do. All right, we have Nabal as a scoundrel. You can't knock any sense into him, even with a 2x4. But we know his wife. She's pretty reasonable. So they go to his wife and they said, look, David sent these guys to your ruthless, hard-headed husband, and you know him. You can't get anything through to him. Hey, he's a fool. I mean, nobody wants to talk to him, and he sent him away. And you see to what can you do about this, Abigail? And so Abigail makes haste immediately. She gets all these provisions together, doesn't tell her husband, sends her servants ahead of her, comes behind them with all of these provisions for David and his men. David is coming one way, and she's going to meet him. David is coming, and I can just imagine. Oh, could you imagine the conversations that are taking place? And whoever gets we don't know who's sort of worked their way up the hierarchy yet. But man, could you imagine these guys are getting an earful? I mean, as a matter of fact, when Abigail meets him, the text says that he just finished saying, Nabal's dead. I mean, Nabal is gone. I'm going to wipe him off the face of this earth. And this beautiful woman with all this food shows up. And the first thing that she does is she just gets off, dismounts, and falls on her face. And she tells David, oh, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry that your servants were turned away by my ruthless husband. Don't pay any attention to him. He's a foolish man. I didn't know. If I had been there, I would have done something. I didn't know. As soon as someone told me, I decided that I was going to bring this stuff to you. And then, in this conversation that she has with David, it says she was so smart, so wise, and she lays it out to David. I don't want to be presumptuous here, David, but I know you're going to be king. And you see this growing. Please see how this is growing. Jonathan was the first to figure it out. Over time, other people started figuring out, so much so that David had a spy network. David knew what Saul was doing before Saul did it. He would find out, Saul's coming. How would he find out? Because he still had people loyal to him back in Saul's camp that would come and tell him this stuff, including Jonathan. So other people were finding out. Saul has already said, I know it. And now she says, I know it. And when you become king, understand that if you don't do the right thing in this moment, you will be haunted by it. If you kill him, it's going to bother your conscience so bad. I mean, look at the conscience of David when he just cut off the robe. That bothered him. I mean, if you go slaughter everybody in his household, how are you going to live with yourself? And then when you become king, people are going to say, that David guy, man, he's ruthless. He's the harsh man full of wrath. He's difficult to deal with. Let's all be afraid of David. That's not who you are, David. And then you have what I think is sort of the climax of this particular story, when she stops speaking. Now, we don't have any indication, and the text doesn't tell us if there is any kind of a gap there. I don't know if David is looking at her in total disbelief, but when he does speak, he praises her and says, I'm telling you what, if you had not shown up, they all would have been dead. And then he gives God credit and glory for what's taken place, and then he says, go in peace. I'm not going to come kill everybody. He takes all the gifts, tells her to go in peace. She goes home, and her husband had that feast fit for a king. And so she knows he's drunk. If you've talked to a drunk person, there's really no need. I mean, it's not going to accomplish anything, right? They don't have their faculties about them. Their mind's not working right. They're not going to remember what you tell them anyway, probably. And so she says, you know what? I'm going to wait till tomorrow. And so he sleeps it off. And she comes in and says, you know what I did yesterday? I heard what you did with David. And so I took matters in my own hand. And I went and I gave him some food, him and his men. And it says Nabal basically just went like cold like a stone. I mean, you could just see him. He's listening. 10 days later he dies. And then David takes advantage of this. There's a smart, beautiful woman available. And so he sends his guys and says, why don't you go propose to her? and see if she will become my wife. And there's a mention of another wife in that particular story as well, which is real people with real personalities making real decisions in real time that have real consequences. And I don't know, I think everybody in this room is old enough to know this very true fact about people. They're complicated. People are complicated. David is complicated. And so, did God want David to have all these wives? No, he doesn't. Does David have more wives than he should? Yes, he does. Is that going to hurt David? Yes, it will. Real people making real decisions in real time, and those real decisions have real consequences on their life. And so we're trying to piece together what makes David a man after God's own heart, even when we see moments like this and other moments that in our eyes will seem much worse than this. All right, so let's go ahead and answer the questions that we have set up for us. We answer the same 5 questions every week about the story. The first one is just the defining moments in the story. And I'll note to you a couple of those. I think the inciting incident is simply when David sends, maybe it could be when they're hungry, but when David sends his men to Nabal, that's going to get this story rolling in a certain direction. And then when David, they report back to David what's happened, you start seeing the tension rise, right? So after that moment, when they go to Nabal, and Nabal says no, this story now has gone to another level. It's not the way we would write it. If we could write the story the way that we think it should turn out, we would have said, Nabal says, absolutely, David, you've done good for me, I'm going to do good for you, and that's the end of that, but that's not how it goes. And so there's tension starts to build. And you can see the tension as these men are heading back to David, and they might be thinking, what are we going to tell David? This isn't going to turn out very well for anybody. This is terrible. I can't believe that guy didn't give us any food. And then when he tells David gets, so that just keeps building and building and building. And then on the other side, you have more of the stress or the struggle building as Abigail has to make a decision not to just sit back and be idle and allow her entire household to be destroyed. And so this tension. So if you're visualizing the story, you're seeing David and his men with these looks on their face. I'm killing them. And Abigail coming to meet him. I sure hope I can talk some sense into David. If not, everyone's going to die. And that's the moment where in this story, the tension comes to its height. And when Abigail lays out her case, and then she's quiet, you don't know what's going to happen next. If you've never heard the story before, this would be the moment in the story you're like, okay, what's going to happen? What's David going to do? Is David just going to brush her aside? Is he going to kill her? What's he going to do? And then when that happens, then you have the falling action, and David leaves. Nabal ends, his fate ends. So I put that question in there because I want you to start thinking in story format, because the Bible is written in story format, and if we skip the story side of it, we're going to miss a lot of what the Bible is trying to teach us. So I want you to do that. So let's go ahead and go to question number 2, and that is, what lessons do we learn from the story? I do have a microphone runner there, so if you want to raise your hand, and the microphone will be given to you, and you need to speak directly into the microphone. And Jason is trying to communicate to me that he has something he wants to say too.
I was also raising my hand.
All right, he's raising his hand and handing that microphone at the same time. Jason, we'll let you go first.
I find it interesting what she said to David, and I think we need to bear this in mind. She didn't say that if he did this, God wouldn't forgive you. She said, if you do this, you're going to carry it with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we need to understand that. We can be forgiven for our sins, but we need to understand and take into consideration that regardless of the forgiveness from God and even from other people, it will take time for us no longer to carry that act, especially if it's something outrageous. We need to guard our reputation as well. Sometimes we talk about not just avoiding sin, but avoiding the appearance of sin. And that really is us protecting our reputation. And by the same token, that should be a motivation to avoid sinning, especially in an outrageous or spectacular fashion.
Very good. So these are real people making real decisions in real time, have real consequences. And sometimes those consequences outlast the forgiveness. We can get, I'm not going to ask anybody to show a hand. I know everybody's going to raise their hand. How many of you have lived with a consequence of something, an unpleasant consequence of something you've done, even after you were forgiven? And you look back at that thinking, that was awful. I'm living with the burden of that. It might just be that what you did has shaped you in a way that it's not good. It's taken you a while to rebuild who you are. And that's not to beat ourselves up over those things, because we are forgiven, but it's the warning here is to remember that ahead of time. If I do this, it's going to shape who I am. It's going to make me a different person, and that person is going to be hard to live with, and I'm not going to like it. So we have to, real people make real decisions in real time. They have real consequences. Sometimes we need to consider those consequences. It's not just about going to heaven or going to hell. Sometimes it's about who we are as a result of the decisions we make. And how hard is it to carry those burdens around in our life? It's difficult. Joe?
Yeah, let's see. I guess this is in verse 10, where Nabal to David's servants, who is David? I think this is number 1 and number 2, because number 1, when he asks who is David, we find out David's going to show him who is David. And it doesn't turn out that way. When you're reading here, you're thinking, he's going to have trouble with David, but it's not David. So that's the beauty of the storytelling, the number 1. But I think number 2 is just to make the assumption of who you are is, who is David? I know who I am, but I don't care about David. And it goes back to Pharaoh, who is that God that you keep talking about? It's the same thing. When we start putting our degrees, our jobs, our money, our status, our family, or whatever it is, we start leaning on that as opposed to God. There's going to be problems. Maybe not now, but there will be later. So,
very good.
Assumption of who you are without God.
Yeah, very good. And his assumption of who David is at the end of verse 10, it says, "This is a time when many servants are breaking away from their masters." Is that a fair characterization of what David has done? No. Why did David leave? You get enough spears thrown at you, you're likely to leave. I mean, there's just not a lot of good things to stay if somebody's throwing spears at you and has told all of their guys to kill you. I'd probably have left too. So it's not consistent with who David was. The story's floating out around there. Who had the story right? Abigail. Who had the story wrong? Nabal. Is that true in life? Are there sometimes two sides to every story, and when you pick the wrong side, you're going to end up with egg on your face, or a lot of people are going to suffer because of that particular occasion? Debbie?
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's just very odd. I just don't think that Nabal was being honest, because he said, who's David and who's the son of Jesse and where did he come from? Like, he doesn't know. But he was a very rich, wealthy man who should have known what was going on. And apparently, Abigail had heard about David because she said, "My Lord fights the battles of the Lord." And then she said, "The Lord will do what he has promised and will make you a leader over Israel." I think Abigail knew who David was. I'm sure stories had circulated.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think this guy was just clueless.
Yeah.
I think he was just being a nut.
Do we sometimes only hear what we want to hear? We only hear one side of the story because that's the side we want to hear. It is in his interest, he thinks right now, to hold on to his stuff. And so he's going to focus on this side. You broke away. Everybody's breaking away from Saul. No, I'm not going to have anything to do with you. But it also goes back, would all of Israel have known who David was? Absolutely. They're singing the song. Saul has killed thousands. David has killed tens of thousands. David was a commander over 1,000 men. That's not a small post. That is a pretty significant post. And there are verses that we've already looked at and we've referenced along the way that says everybody liked David. As a matter of fact, Jonathan, Michael's trying to help him. The priest is saying, who's better, who's more loyal to you than David is? Everybody knows this, but sometimes do we not know what we really do know? We talk, a blind eye to the facts because they don't suit our particular interest right then and there. Yes, ma'am.
I had two thoughts. Going back to the consequences, we also suffer the consequences of not having a consequence of what we might have done right. For example, if Nabal had helped David out, who's the future king? Who knows what benefits he would have reaped in the future? We'll never know. And the second thought is, Christ said, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. I'm quoted it wrong, I'm sure, but here Nabal's going, who is David? What does it matter who a person is if they need us and we know what the right thing to do is?
Okay, very good. Good, two really good points there. Another thing that brings up in my mind is you could make the case that he didn't know David anything. He didn't ask David to protect his stuff. If he had asked and entered into some kind of a contract, then he would owe David something. You could make an argument, but I think that there's something bigger than that here do we owe people common decency? I think that is something that God expects. If somebody does something good for you and to you, what should you do for them? Something good. So I think there is a law here that God has put on this earth that do good things for good people. And do good things. Jesus comes and sort of puts that law on its head a little bit and expands it. Not only, it just makes sense, do good things for good people, but Jesus says, do good things for bad people. Do good things for enemies. So let's say everything under Christ's law, let's say everything Nabal was wanting to attribute to David, breaking away from Saul, blah, 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 blah. Should you still treat your enemies well? And let's say he was an enemy. Let's say he was really an enemy. And so I think that's a thing to consider as well. All right, who has anything else they want to, just general points that we learned from this particular story? You'd like to share those with us before we get into the people?
To follow up on what you say it's just do good to people. You're not the judge whether somebody's good or bad. I think is the point Christ is making, is just do good to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And if he would have followed that law, everything would have been better. Who knows? He may have been, there are people later on that do good for David when David's fleeing from Absalom. And what does David do when David comes back? Sets a place at his table for them. There's an older gentleman who says, man, I'm too old for this. I want to go back to my family. I'm going to die pretty soon, David. But I'll send my son in my stead. And so his son got to sit at David's table because of the good that he did. So that's a very good point there. All right, what about, let me see if I have anything here. Courage isn't just physical sometimes. Sometimes it's moral courage. Did it take courage for Abigail to do what she did? I think so. Because what if David, it doesn't turn out well for her? I mean, she knows enough about David. She's heard enough stories that she has some confidence. She trusts God, I believe. But it still takes some courage sometimes to step out and put yourself in danger. We've looked at Esther. Did it take courage for Esther to go in before the king, knowing that if he doesn't reach his scepter out, she's dead? Absolutely. And so courage isn't always physical. I'm stronger than you, or I'm not as strong as you. I'm still going to fight you. Sometimes it's moral. It's conviction of heart that gets people to do. And I love this about this story because, as Joe pointed out, if you had never heard this story before, and Nabal says, get out of here, and you followed the story so far, you know everything about David, you're just being introduced to Nabal, you have no idea how this is going to end, but you don't think it's going to end very well. And you probably would be thinking David is going to come and this guy's going to be in trouble. God is so good at throwing these unexpected things in there to get us to stop, I think, and look at the story deeper. You have an unexpected hero, or a female hero. Mm-hmm. I think that's heroine, right? So you have this unexpected hero here, and that is Abigail. Debbie?
What I think is interesting is that you can see both of them. You can see their tempers. You can see their anger. righteous or wrong. But David got indignant with Nabal for refusing when he had been really good to his servants and his shearers. And then you see Nabal, who got really mad when he thought his stuff was going to be taken from him. And that's when it happened, when Abigail told him, well, I took it upon myself to give David what he and his men needed. And I gave him all this stuff. And I can just imagine the anger that flared up in Nabal. And when your blood pressure goes sky high, you can have a stroke.
Yeah, it may have
And
been.
that's just what happened. He had a stroke, and God took him out.
Mm-hmm.
But it was because of anger. It wasn't because he was doing anything right. Said he was full of evil.
Yeah, very
and
good.
he got angry, and he had a stroke.
Very
So-
good. Thank you for that. That's an excellent point. Anything about the characters? Question number 3. We had Nabal a little bit there. We'll look at David more specifically in a second about his heart. And we have Joe over here. Anybody else have something? Raise your hand. I mean, it's a great story, man. You guys have to have something that you've learned from this story. Mike's got something. I knew Mike would have something good. Joe?
Yes, the servant that told Nabal's wife, Abigail, about what had happened, I thought, if you know something's going on, I guess, one thing that, looking at sort of the minor characters, that was very bold. I mean, this is the servant of Nabal, not the servant of Abigail. And so for him to go tell on Nabal to Abigail, I think that's pretty amazing that he would take the time to do that. I've got to suspect, with what we're told with Nabal and Abigail, that it's already happened before. I can't imagine this is a one-time kind of situation. But nonetheless, he took the time. All right, I guess I got to go talk to her again because, So I think that was pretty amazing.
A couple good things there. One is this probably isn't the first time this has happened, that Abigail had to clean up a mess from her husband. It's probably happened before. She's probably pretty good at it. Enough times before that this particular minor character, if you will, knew the only way that this is going to be solved appropriately is if I go talk to Abigail. And it does bode very well for this minor character who overhears this, that he has the guts to go to Abigail because he knows, and a couple things here. First of all, he doesn't pull any punches about what he thinks about Nabal to Nabal's wife. I tell you, just if you want to say bad things about me, say them to me or say them to Terry. Don't say them to Shelley. All right? If you want to say bad things about a guy, it's probably not a good thing to go tell his wife all the bad things about him, because even if they're true, she might come out ready to fight you. But he knew enough about Nabal and Abigail to, she's reasonable here. Mike?
I was going to say the marriage probably really wasn't for love. It was an acquisition of his quartermaster who could feed his army. He now gains supplies and things that he needs at that moment in time. And then he goes on and marries other people.
You talk about David or
David and Abigail.
Okay, yeah, This is the whole thing. We'll end up unfolding that a little bit. Abigail isn't really mentioned much after this. She's mentioned with his wives, and there's probably only one son that we have recorded that belongs to Abigail. But this is another point. You're like this with David because you're thinking you have a beautiful, smart wife. Why you keep getting more? You have the one that you've wanted to get, and he already has a wife at this point. And it does tell us in the text that Saul has given Michal to another man, and that is going to be perplexing when we get there. When David gets her back, I was like, why are you worried? I'd leave her away, man. So David is complex in all of this. But even going back to Nabal, question was asked last time I thought this: why did Abigail marry this guy? Well, probably didn't have a choice. This is an entirely different world where women are sort of property of their dads and then property of their husbands. And so in order to get something from his wife, Abigail's dad probably made some kind of an agreement with him. And so that is an underlying, that's at the surface of all these stories. You know, the women are not treated very well in these stories. And so we should be grateful that we don't live in that era and that Jesus has freed and made us all one in Christ. Brother?
I was just going to say.
Oh, I thought you had a microphone.
You spoke on it, but the fact that Nabal had the money to pay the price to the father to get himself a wife.
Yeah, so he had the money to pay for the bride. And in the overall scope of things, how much would this have set Nabal back? I mean, we all have different financial situations, right? It's maybe for me, it would be like buying somebody a cup of coffee. All right, it's just not much, right? I could say no, but you know, I have enough money to buy a cup of coffee. Nabal had enough money to dress a couple of sheep and to give some dates and to give some bread and all that good stuff. It wouldn't. His portfolio wouldn't have gone down that much, right? He would have bounced back. And as was pointed out, who knows how well he would have bounced back if he had done this great thing. So a couple other things here. We only have a few minutes left. Here's a point that I want to know. Did Abigail need to teach David the kind of character he should have, or just remind him of the kind of character that he already had? I think that's it. He just needed to be reminded. I think there's a lot of practical application there. Sometimes I don't need to be reminded or told what is right and what is wrong. I just need to be reminded who I am. And you need to be reminded who you are. You know, and how many times have you had, you probably said it to your kids, that's not who you are. You're acting in a way contrary to who you are. And that's what she's really telling David. Not David, I'm going to convince you to have a good heart. We already know David has a good heart. It was the very beginning, right? I'm just going to remind you of the kind of man that you are. And then when you're reminded about who you really are, then you have more of the courage to do the right things. I think you do see some humility in David. He listens to wise counsel. I mean, how powerful is that? We should all listen to wise counsel. And I think that is something that makes David a man after God's own heart. He stands in contrast with Saul. What was one of God's biggest complaints about Saul? Not only did he not obey, but he says, when you were little in your own eyes, I made you king over Israel. Remember, he made a monument to himself in all of this debacle that got the kingdom taken away from him. And now basically God has to say, you're not small in your own eyes anymore. You're a little too big for your britches. You've outgrown yourself, and that's not good. David never really seems to do that. David never gets to a point where he thinks bigger of himself than he really is. He always comes down to earth. And I think that is something that makes him a man after God's own heart. And then I love the fact it would be easy for David to give all credit to Abigail here, but who does David give ultimate credit to? Yes, he says, God, if you weren't involved in this, I see what you've done. And that's also an exciting thing in life sometimes when you first realize that was God. And sometimes we're stubborn. We don't see it as we're going through it, whether we're deliverance or the blessings. We feel like all these things are happening because of we're doing something bad or that we're doing something good or whatever the case may be. And then when it clicks, you know what? That was God being involved with that. That wasn't me. That wasn't you. That was really God. And Abigail, obviously, David still appreciated Abigail, God allowing her to use him, but he gave God ultimate credit for all of this.
Why do you think David, if he always did everything God wanted to do and had a heart of God, why would he take a second wife?
He didn't always do everything God wanted him to do. All right, we see all of that. In the New Testament, Jesus is credited as the hardness of heart. Culture maybe have a difference with this. Power in the name that you have is tied up with how many wives you have, how many kids you have. And so, Abraham, I can't answer all those questions except saying these are real people, making real decisions in real time. They have real consequences. Maybe he didn't see God's plan clearly, but God communicated it clearly. Jesus goes back to the beginning of time. And instead of, you go ahead and ring it, instead of sometimes, I do the same thing sometimes. I don't always do what God wants me to do. I reason, I justify, and you probably do too, if you're honest with yourself. Doesn't mean you're a bad person and you don't have a heart of God. It just means you're a real person making decisions in real time and they have real consequences. All right, everybody, we'll go on to the second time David spares Saul on Wednesday night.